everyone, and welcome to another First Impressions video. Today I'm going to be talking about Kodansha's most recent debut, Mitsurou Kubo's Again. This is a 12-volume series completed in Japan and follows a high schooler called Imamura as he's sent back to the past 3 years as an opportunity to relive his high school days. Now, if you know nothing about this manga, I personally didn't know a huge amount about it, aside from it was Kubo's most recent work, as well as one of her more popular series, and that it involved ouendan. It was a surprise going into this series, realizing that it was actually had a time travel element to it. So in this series, Imamura, our main character, is very antisocial. He doesn't interact with anyone at school. A lot of people consider him very standoffish and sort of a bad sort. He has really blonde, dyed hair and sort of a shifty look to him, so nobody ever really got close to him in his first year, and it sort of stayed that way over his whole high school experience. And on his graduation day, he falls into an accident, literally, and ends up 3 years in his past, given a second chance to not only give himself a better high school experience, but also the chance to save his school's ouendan team. So if you don't know what ouendan is, it's the traditional Japanese cheerleading. You may have seen it in some sports manga or anime, things like Ace of Diamond, or I'm sure there's plenty, but typically a male-dominated event with that, not really the pom-pom cheerleaders that you think of when you do think of cheerleading. They have the banners and they have chants and the taiko drums, a lot different. But you do see it quite often in Japanese media. With this particular story, we have a main character who has been completely disconnected from his social cohort, and given this second chance, he gets to sort of not repent, but find out what would happen if he did take up ouendan, like he had sort of considered, because at the time there was sort of a failing club. They only had one member, which was the captain, Usagi, who is on this cover, and after her graduation the club really just died. There was no interest in it. So it's not only helping himself and his own life and his own experience, but also giving this club a second chance. In addition to our main character and the character on the cover, we have a third main character who is one of Imamura's classmates. She is the complete opposite to Imamura. So she's very popular, she has a boyfriend, she's very well liked in her club, and so for her graduation she had a very fulfilling high school experience, but she also falls into this accident on her graduation day and ends up 3 years in the past. So it gives a good contrast in so far as having a person who probably would want to make a lot of different decisions for how their life went over this period, comparatively to somebody who feels like they made all the right decisions and that their life was in a really good place and they didn't want a second chance. So in that sense, I think this is a pretty interesting twist on the time travel manga. I must also say, as the first of Mitsurou Kubo's work in English, I think it's a very good introduction to not only her art style, but also how she writes characters and how they interact. I absolutely adore how expressive all of her characters are. Inside, you can tell she's very sort of heavy-handed with inks, but in a purposeful way. And you can see on all of these pages that all of these characters have a huge range of emotion, and you can always tell almost what they're thinking just from the look on their face. And it's sometimes hard to do that in certain styles. You can also see even on this cover, she has very heavy like outline art and very distinct facial features, which I think is a nice change. We are also getting another Mitsurou Kubo manga, being Moteki, in a couple months. I know that I think on average that's her more well-known work, but again is a great story in its own right, and I've heard nothing but good things about this title. Having now read the first volume, I'm really interested to see where this series goes. I think this first volume is a great introduction to all of the characters as well as the main conflict, and it ends on a really different sort of cliffhanger that really makes you want to read the next volume, in my opinion. It's funny. It has a level of dark humor to it and like self-aware humor that really shows that Kubo, while she's treating some things very seriously, it has still that like underlying humor to it and sort of sarcastic, disconnected worldview that our main character has, and coming from his perspective, it makes a lot of sense. In this particular volume, it does introduce a lot of things which I think will come up in the future as well. So you can obviously see there's a lot of ways this manga can go, and there is a very steady direction that it's heading. Like I said, I didn't really know a huge amount about this manga aside that from what I said before, and it really didn't let me down in those aspects. It's a fun sports series, although not near really a typical sport that you might see. And I wouldn't really put it in the same category as a typical sports manga because it's not just a sports manga, it's not just a time travel manga, it's not just a high school comedy or a high school drama manga. It has all of these different genres blended into a really interesting mix that I'm curious to see continue in the next volumes. Something that I don't normally mention for these sorts of first impressions, but I will because I am familiar with this person's previous work. But the lettering in this particular volume, and I think the next volume, is done by a comic artist called E.K. Weaver, who has had her own web comic that's won a bunch of awards, finished quite a few years ago, and I used to read that. It was pretty great, and you can tell the amount of, just from the work that she presents in this series, you can tell that she's a Mitsurou Kubo fan. I still follow her Twitter. She's a big fan of Yuri on Ice and was introduced to her that way. But just to point out some of her work, obviously letterers do a lot of things, but one of the major things she mentioned was actually redrawing all of these like sound effects and lyrics, and I personally think her style was really well suited for this manga and Kubo's artwork, so it was a great choice by Kodansha. In comparison, I had read Silver Spoon on the same day, which was a wonderful manga and a wonderful release by Yen Press. The lettering job wasn't as good, and it really stuck out to me in this particular volume. And I don't know whether that's just due to my previous awareness of this individual's work and that she's a fan of this particular mangaka, or if it was just that overly improved or different from some of the other series that I'm reading currently. So it was an interesting thing to notice, and I don't know if that matters to anyone else, but I thought it was a pretty good thing to see, being able to completely localize something without removing you know, any of the artist's actual intention. As I said, those lyrics, but you can also see with sound effects, where the sound effects are still, I mean, they're still there, but the English translation matches them very, very well, and it's not just a normal, like, font that you see generally, where they just put in, like, a similar font, that hoping that it would, you know, translate well. But anyway, as for my final thoughts on this first volume, it's a really, really great start to a very interesting manga. You do see lots of, you know, sports series are very popular at the moment. Time travel and this element of like falling into a new world or falling into your past, and that question of if you were given a chance to make a change or make different choices, would you? None of those things are new ideas, but they're presented really, really well in this volume. I really enjoyed this first volume, and I hope you guys give it a chance, because it seems to be going into some really interesting things and to some really interesting places. If you're wanting this volume, it's available anywhere you can buy books, whether that be Amazon, Book Depository, wherever else. I'm going to link a Book Depository link in the, you know, description. So if you are wanting to try it or wanting to support the series, you can get it there. Otherwise, wherever you normally buy your books. But thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video, guys. Bye till then.